to the worthy dead belonging to Henry David Cogswell, famous San Francisco dentist. Born in 1820, he came here during the gold rush. But that isn't really the interesting part of Dr. Cogswell. One thing is, he was kind of a Horatio Alger character in that he was orphaned both by parents and grandparents at the age of 8 or 9 years old in New York and later on in Rhode Island, and actually started out life in a workhouse as what they called a workhouse brat. So he deserves some credit from having worked himself up, having first of all a lucky break getting apprenticed to a dentist. That's the way everybody worked in those days. And made him, he actually went to medical school for a year, but decided that dentistry was up his alley. Even invented some dental, made some dental inventions that were important in his day. And even though he was a workhouse brat, by the time he had been practicing dentist in Providence, Rhode Island for 10 years, he was a very well-off gentleman, had married the daughter of a prominent Providence, Rhode Island merchant. And it just so happened that the building where his dental office burned down in 1849, and he was a little restless anyway, so he decided to come to California to see what was going on with this gold rush he'd heard all about. He came to California in 49, went up into the gold fields, mined, did dentistry, and became an entrepreneur. With the money he got, he would get gold dust for pulling people's teeth. And decided to go back to San Francisco, sent for his wife, and opened his dental practice in San Francisco under the sign of the Golden Tooth. Henry is probably best known today for two things. One, his lack of modesty, and two, his interest in temperance, very, very anti-alcohol. And this monument displays both these characteristics. He practiced dentistry for about 10 years, and at the end of that time he was still only in his 30s and so rich he decided to retire. In San Francisco he had observed a great deal of drinking and carrying on, and he was much against that, so he decided to devote the rest of his life to philanthropy. Not only the Cogswell Dental College and not only the Cogswell Technical Institute, but also a way to get people not to drink. And he decided that the best way to do that was to have fountains filled with water coming out of them where people could have water instead of alcohol, and that would solve the problem. Well, of course we know it did not. He also had said a number of times that he thought modesty was just silly. If you had done good things and accomplished a lot, you ought to brag about it. Modesty was foolish. Why would you be modest? And you can see here what he meant, because he bought this lot long before his death in the 1870s from Mountain View Cemetery, and he himself designed this wonderful granite structure which was carved in New England under the direction of the Mount Auburn Marble and Stone Company and brought out here on railroad cars in the early days of the Transcontinental Railroad, and ended up at the end of the railroad line in downtown Oakland, was brought up the hill here to Mountain View. Quite an engineering feat in and of itself. And according to Mr. McDonald, the guy from Mount Auburn Marble and Stone who came with all of this, which incidentally took about 3 years to carve. This is a very intricate and beautiful example of monument carving. He came up here, and for quite a while they built this monument up here on the hill at Mountain View. People came from all around to watch. It wasn't completed until 1887, and of course Dr. Cogswell was still alive, and he came here frequently to see what was going on and be sure it was going according to what his directions were. You can see much here that will let you know what Dr. Cogswell was like. First, his portraits here, and it's very much like the portrait on the fountains that he had built and sent around to various cities. They also had his portrait, actually a statue of him on their top. There's a very interesting one that was at the corner of California and Market Street in downtown San Francisco, showing him standing on top of the fountain with a glass of water in one hand and a scroll which was a temperance pledge in the other hand. And this lasted for about 10 years until a lot of the local gentlemen who got kind of sick and tired of Cogswell's temperance ideas came along one night. If you saw them taking down the statue of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad, they did more or less the same thing with Henry Cogswell's fountain statue. They lassoed it and pulled it down and dragged it off to the dump. Didn't stop in. He kept on building statues. He said he was going to fountains. He said he was going to build a fountain, one fountain for every 100 taverns throughout the United States. And he really worked hard at that, and there are Henry Cogswell fountains all over the country, although many of them suffered the same fate as the San Francisco one. They were demolished by local groups who didn't care for them. This monument is further into his ideas. First of all, you can see how modest he was not. And then there are 4 statues up here, not only faith, hope, and charity, but also temperance, which is on the other side here. You see hope and charity here, faith and temperance on the other side. On the top is a star. I don't know what the star actually meant to Cogswell, but it's on the top here. It was on the top of his lamps around his fountains. His wife is also buried here, and Dr. Cogswell ended up here in 1900, buried somewhere in the grounds, not underneath this monument, he and his wife. You'll see also a fountain on this side, and what appears to be a grotto with water coming out of it on this side, topped by a cross. All of this is Dr. Cogswell's design. He did this. And so, I think the last little interesting bit is that at the time this was being constructed, Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of this cemetery, was down at Stanford doing some work. And one likes to think that maybe he came up to Mountain View to see how things were going on his cemetery design, and he would have seen this, and I wonder what he would have thought. Anyway, finally Dr. Cogswell died in 1900 and was buried here, and later on his wife.